Hi guys, hope you're well. Today I've got something a little bit different for you. I'm going to be doing a critical thinking class. This is aimed for learners within businesses, doing a high B2 level, so upper intermediate, and of course C1 level, which is advanced. And the topic I have for you is the French rail strike. The French rail, or SNCF, are currently having major problems with the French government, and they are planning a series of strikes. We're going to be looking at the pros and cons of this, and I'm going to be asking you in your class to be doing some discussions, some debates. Okay? Now, to prepare for this, you're going to need to follow the link in the description and print and or read the text. Okay, you will need to have the text with you because we're going to be analysing a lot of vocabulary as well as having the conversations. I'm going to be putting some questions to you. Okay, the objective of this is to successfully analyse both sides of the argument. We're not trying to be pro this or pro that or against this or against that. It is very much an analytical task, and hopefully by the end we'll be able to have objectively looked at both sides of this delicate matter. Okay guys, so hopefully you've had a look at the text. If you have it in front of you, you can see the first page is talking about the strike. Okay. Now, a strike is basically when people refuse to work. They do this as a form of protest against their employer or against the government generally. Now, you can see there are numerous ways I can use this word, strike, and I've put some examples on the board. We have to strike, which is a verb. We have to go on strike. We have to be on strike. And you can also use it as a noun. So, a strike. There is a strike on Saturday. There will be a strike next week. And the people who do this are strikers, the people who strike. And the question for the first part of this class is going to be this here. How effective are strikes? So I'd like you to think a little bit about maybe strikes you've seen on television, strikes that have happened in your country, and tell me, or your teacher, a little bit about how effective you think they are. Some inspiration for you. These are notes that I took from my classes when I do this exercise. So, some comments from my students. One person told me, one day is not effective. It needs to be a minimum of a week or maybe even more in order to have an effect. Another person told me, strikes are just an excuse for a holiday and they don't achieve anything. Another person informed me that strikes in Barcelona for the metro workers were successful a few months ago, and by striking, they actually managed to increase their pay. So I'd like you to think about these. Think about your opinion, think about the pros and cons of striking, and have a discussion with your classmates for approximately 5 or 10 minutes. Make some notes and feedback to your teacher. Okay guys, a little feedback. Quite often when I do this task, these are the principal points that come up. The first one here is that if you notice your calendar on the first page that demonstrates the days for the strike, you'll see that there are 36 days of strike in 3 months. So people quite often talk about this point a lot, and they make the point, is this going to be excessive? Or is this, as one of my students said, is this the only way that these people can make the government notice? So that's important. Have you talked about this? Have you mentioned the quantity of time these guys are going to go on strike? Also, you'll notice that I've put here, public versus government, who suffers? I've had students comment that the public are going to suffer from these strikes and the government are not going to care. Equally, I've had students comment that the government will suffer from these strikes, and this is the only way that the workers will make them take notice. Be interesting to hear your thoughts. Okay guys, so let's get down to the real argument here. And this argument revolves around nationalisation versus privatisation. At the moment, the French rail service, the SNCF, is nationalised, which means that the French taxpayer pays the government and the government pays for the rail service. Under the new legislation, which is due to happen in the next few years, the French government is going to open this national service to private bidders, so that the service, in theory, will become privatised, owned by private companies. And some people are happy about this, and some people are not. I'd like you in the next part of our lesson to talk about, again, the rail service in your country. Is it private? Is it national? Which do you think is better and why? Think of some advantages and disadvantages between national ownership and private ownership. Again, I've got some of my opinions from my students here, just to give you some inspiration. So, first person told me, it's a national service for everyone, therefore the taxpayer should pay. Another person said, I don't use it, the rail service, so I don't want to pay for it. So she's obviously in favour of privatisation. And another person made the comment, private companies are obsessed with profit and not with quality of service. So she was very much against the privatisation of the rail services. So have a think in your groups and let your teacher know what you think. Which do you prefer and why? Okay, just a quick feedback. These are some of the comments that I typically get from my students. See if you agree or disagree. So in favour of nationalisation, we have cheaper prices because the government is paying, so the ticket prices generally are cheaper. You can see also that lines will go to all towns. So in a nationalised system, generally the train network is very extensive. It will go even to small towns because they're not interested in profit, making money. They're going to send their trains to every single town in the country. The problem can be that there is not very much investment because they're using a budget, a very strict budget, and sometimes the train quality of the physical train, they can be very old carriages, they can be very old trains, and the quality is not so great. In favour of privatisation, some of the typical arguments are that it's more expensive. So this is an argument against, obviously. They want to make a profit. This is the idea of a private company. So the tickets are more expensive. For example, in Britain, we have a private rail service. It's extremely expensive. Equally, criticism is that they will only open profitable lines. So if you live in a small town in the middle of nowhere, perhaps they're not going to connect a train line to your town because they're not going to make much money and it's not going to be worth the cost of maintaining that line. But they do have quality trains. If you go on a private train, it's going to be very clean, very modern, with a lot of different facilities on it. So these are all different arguments from my students, okay? So compare them with what you have said. Do you agree or do you disagree? Okay, so why do the SNCF workers care about this shift from nationalisation to privatisation? Well, the answer is quite clear. When you look at this, the SNCF workers are working in the public sector. That means they are civil servants, people who work for the government. And under their current contracts, they receive quite generous benefits. If you check this page, which you should have printed, okay? If you look at the top of this page, it says SNCF workers enjoy generous conditions, including automatic annual pay rises, early retirement, 28 days of paid annual leave, and protection from dismissal. Their close relatives are also entitled to free rail tickets. Okay? So these workers get a lot of good benefits and they're going to fight in order to keep them, which I think we can all understand. Now, the other side of the argument will come from private workers, from the private sector, people working in companies in the private market. Okay? They're going to look at these conditions and say, well, I don't have those conditions in my job, so you shouldn't have it in yours. So this is the next question. What do you think? Do you think the generous conditions that they receive are too much? Or do you think they're entitled to fight for their rights? The question is, what do you think? How do people perceive civil servants in your country, especially if you're working in the private sector, and perhaps vice versa? What would you do in their situation? So have a quick 5-minute, 10-minute discussion and feedback to your teacher. Okay guys, final feedback, some opinions from my students that I've collected. Now in favour of the privatisation model, you can see that the first point I've put on the board, the SNCF is in debt to 46.6 billion euros, as you can see in the text here. And that is one of the reasons why people are saying that privatisation is one of the only solutions to try and clear this debt. It is a significant amount of money. Another of my students made a point that instead of private workers complaining about the conditions that civil servants receive, why don't they fight to improve their conditions? Why can we not, all of us, have the same sort of conditions that the SNCF workers have? Another point, kind of in the middle, was to subsidise the rail, where the government maintains ownership of the rail service, but then just subcontracts or gives subsidies, small payments to companies to run it for them. Would this be another option? What do you think? So, in conclusion, final thoughts. With your teacher, what would you do in this situation? Summarise what you think is better, nationalisation or privatisation, and feedback to your teacher which option you would take in this case, in the case of the French rail. Refer back to your text, okay? Would you privatise or would you nationalise? Thanks for tuning in, guys. Hope you found it beneficial.